All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. If we could close the door back there, make sure everybody's in. I've got some news here I want to report. First of all, if you look at our agenda, we've got a slight change. We are not going to vote today on House Bill 290. Okay? That bill is still being worked on by the sponsor of the bill. And so we're probably going to have, just to give everybody a heads up, we're going to have a called meeting on Monday, very likely, to take up that bill and any others, including two that we're going to hear today. And so today's focus, as everyone here, all of our members are aware, my policy here really is that every bill we vote on should first be heard and allow time to learn, to educate, to ask questions. I'm not a big fan of voting on bills the day we hear them. And so today we have two new measures, one that we have postponed a couple of times due to the length of discussion that has taken place on House Bill 290, and that is Chairman Todd Jones's bill, House Bill 261. We are going to educate ourselves on that bill right now. Chairman Jones, if you will come and present House Bill 260 to our members. 261, I apologize.
My apologies. All right, this may be the most famous or infamous 81-line bill in the last 2 to 3 years. So for those of you who have been along for the ride, let's just go on that ride just a little bit longer. For those of you who have not been along for the ride, I'd love to be able to give you just a little bit of color behind the bill. Not to get too kumbaya, but I got to believe that when each of you set about running for public office, one of the things that you wanted to do was the cliche, make a difference. Every time you either look toward the Gold Dome or every time you look to DC, I'm sure you asked yourself, why don't they, and then fill in the blank. I'm sure you had all these ideas in your mind. I'm sure you thought, you know what, if I get there, I'm going to be able to make a real difference. Well, I'm no different than you. In my mind, our role is actually pretty simple. Our role is to try to build an aspirational world for our citizens, something that each one of our citizens can say, I want to be part of something bigger than who I am. I want to be part of a movement that will fundamentally change the lives of 10.5 million Georgians. Now, for some of us, that passion is around education, which I share that passion. For some of us, it's around public safety. For some of us, it's around healthcare. Each one of us has probably that one trigger that kind of moves the needle more than anything else. Healthcare and education are two of those places for me because for so long, if you look out, they both have so many similarities in terms of their challenges. They have similarities in terms of geographic access. They have similarities in terms of potential budget and sometimes true budget need. They have similarities in terms of, I'll just say, where you sit in the socioeconomic ladder, what your ability is to take advantage of different resources. So it was about 2 years ago, the Speaker had named the Special Committee on the Access to Quality Healthcare. And we're in this room, and I'm on that committee. And there was a tremendous amount of, I'll say, testimony being given by a myriad of different healthcare providers, hospitals, clinics, physicians, you name it. Consistently, we heard of all the challenges that healthcare has in Georgia. So we were asked, can you think of a way to possibly address this that isn't necessarily the status quo? Because the status quo is effectively, let's go ahead and hit the tax of about 3%. I'm going to be rounding here, guys. And then we're going to move that money into Atlanta, and then we're going to distribute out from there. For those of you who don't know, every hospital, profit and for-profit, has a requirement in terms of indigent care, charitable care, and things like that. But ultimately, the question came down to, is there a better way? Now, I'm not suggesting that my way is the only way, but right now it's the way that's on the table in terms of for us to consider. So I kept saying to myself, what is it that we want to accomplish? We want to accomplish, first and foremost, access. But in order to provide access, we also need to provide resources, and that's code for cash. We need to determine, is there a way across the 159 counties to be able to deliver to those who need it most, to those who do not have private health insurance, to those that do not have access to literally, I walk out my door and I'm pretty sure I have 50 specialists within 5 miles of me. We don't have that across our state. So an idea came to me. In the mid-2000s, I was part of the beginning of the cap and trade program in the EU. Now, there's a lot of positive and negative connotation about cap and trade. We're going to put that to the side, but I can tell you this one thing. Nearly living in Europe for just about 3 to 4 years, I know that it caused a tremendous amount of focus in terms of how those covered entities moved around, how they were going to get below the cap. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, they were basically capped emissions. So if you think about a traditional plant emitting, emissions, smoke out in terms of what's going out, what could we do there? It's transportation, it's chemicals, it's concrete, it's agriculture, etc. But what I also saw was an amazing amount of innovation. I saw the Nordic countries, for instance, who, as you can probably imagine, depended on hydro a lot because, well, there's a lot of water up there. But what I saw was an amazing amount of time and energy spent on how could we absolutely get the fuel mix perfect to be able to power the grid to be able to keep their emissions as low as possible. Now, there's an argument to be made that without cap and trade, they would have done that anyways. But I will argue being there sometimes for 40 to 45 weeks a year, being with these companies, I will tell you it was definitely a trigger of innovation. So fast forward to 2 years ago, I kept hearing we want to create incentive to do the right thing by those who need it the most. So I thought, why not the corollary? Instead of capping an industry to not do as much, because we didn't want as much emissions in cap and trade, why not create a floor? Why don't we create an aspirational floor that each one of the nonprofit hospitals would try to attain? A floor, as we're calling it, indigent and charitable care, so that they would be able to report back to us, we either made the floor, we came under the floor, or came over the floor. But the natural question is this: what's the incentive to get above the floor? What's the incentive to do more? What's the incentive to innovate? So you start saying to yourself, is there a way to create effectively an exchange? Imagine if you're over the floor, imagine a number of units. And we'll just call them right now ICUs. It's a play on words, but I'll call it indigent care unit. Imagine if you're over the floor, you get effectively these units, fungible, worth money. On the other hand, if you're below the floor, you have to find a way to get to the floor. Now, clearly, getting to the floor, you have several options. One is, can you do more care? Can you do more outreach? Can you get innovative? I'm not suggesting to you, I know every innovation that can happen over the next year, 2, 3, 5 years, but I gotta believe there's some smart people in healthcare. How innovative can they get? Could they infuse capital into hospitals over the floor, now bolstering up that possible rural hospital, the urban hospital, who might be struggling with capital, get a capital infusion, and then in return, if you're below the floor, you get a certain number of those ICUs as basically compensation. Could you maybe acquire a hospital that's over the floor? Because we would want to judge you at the parent level, meaning all your hospitals together, your operations, not just at one. Or you can just literally buy and sell those credits, those ICUs. I've seen it work. Here in the United States, everyone, for those of you who are old enough, and you can tell by my hairline I am, acid rain was solved by cap and trade. It's actually an existing market that continues to move today. So for those of you who remember this back in the 70s and then the 80s, and then thank God it started to deplete in the 90s and then through the 2000s, that was solved through what they call the SOX-NOx market. The coincidence of all coincidences is Kyoto, which is a global climate change treaty, was actually a nearly cut and paste of the acid rain protocol done by the Clinton administration, but that was voted by our Senate 96-0 in a rare time of bipartisan support against the particular treaty. I mention that because we know it works. So let's talk about what I specifically am recommending. I don't believe I have the monopoly or the corner on all the good ideas around how we solve this problem. We hear consistently from the hospitals, Medicaid is reimbursing us at 87 cents on each cost dollar, not each revenue dollar, each cost dollar. We hear consistently from our rural hospitals in terms of their lack of access to capital. I do not necessarily believe that floor and trade is the only way that we could possibly find a solution here, but it's the one that's on the table. It's the one to consider in terms of our ability to test. So let me tell you about what I'd like to be able to do. I want to stress for a moment, it's a test. We are not changing policy, not one iota. How your local hospital currently handles its care, its finance, you name it, none of that is touched in no way, shape, or form. It is folly for anyone to imply it because that's just not a true statement. This is literally a 2-week test in 2022. 1 week in the spring, 1 week in the fall. And the test is effectively a simulation. It's a really cool computer doing about 1 million simulations in the spring and 1 million simulations in the fall. Some of the major variables that would move during those 1 million simulations are what that floor, should that floor be 5% of care? Should that floor be 4%, 10%? But we're going to move the floor during the simulations. The second one is, and I won't make you raise your hands because I know you all know this, Medicaid expansion moves us to 138% of the federal poverty line in terms of who's eligible. I'd love to test 200% of the federal poverty line. That would make us an absolute leader in the country, forget just our state, but the country in terms of this type of care. But that stated, I don't think the test should just do 200% in those 1 million simulations in the spring. It should do anything from 100 to 125 to 150, maybe even go up to 400 while you're at it. But that's the whole purpose. It's a test. It literally is, for those of you in business like myself, we fail every day about 500 times. That's how many product people we have. Our salespeople fail every day because they get told, no, they're not a client, or potential client isn't interested in our product. It's okay to fail because we hope to learn something out of the spring test to move into the fall test, because we'll move the floor, we'll move the definition in terms of what percent of federal poverty, we'll move what we think could be the right number in terms of how much the cost of those credits would be. And ultimately, what we'd love to have, and I will acknowledge Representative Robichaud noted something to me, and I want to acknowledge it right now. I think the language could be improved. In terms of the participation from the nonprofits, we're looking for 2 hours, an hour in the spring and an hour in the fall. You're probably asking, Todd, why? They'll just read the report. Well, that's true. I'm a chairman of one company on the board of 3. I get what it's like to have your time in terms of that need. But I know this. What I saw in Europe was those companies that participated in 2004, getting ready for 2005, they were fundamentally leaps and bounds better prepared for the system once it kicked off than the ones that did not participate. So my thought is 1 hour in the spring, 1 hour in the fall, to not just go through the report. I would never do that. I don't like reading to anyone a PowerPoint report. But going through what did we learn, what did we not learn, what are some of the ways that we can change the variables, and then finally, do we even think it's a success? That's what I want to stress to the committee. Because of the industry that I'm in, I live in a world of failure. I'm like Thomas Edison, 10,000 ways how not to make a light bulb. This, to me, was our aspirational way to solve such a critical problem. I believe our nonprofits want to do it. Can we give them a system that would help them do it? Now, you'll hear about some challenges, so let me go ahead and hit some of them. First, I recognize that COVID has taken, obviously, an impact on our hospitals and their staffing. We're all acknowledging that. So we moved it, you'll see in the bill, it's in 2022 this occurs. That's my way of knocking on wood. We have this in the rearview mirror, but that was basically a relief there. But we do know that there are still some hospitals that may struggle with their IT department to be able to clear the data into the test. We have gone ahead and we've arranged through in-kind contributions that we have IT professionals to help them, okay? We don't want to be a burden to these hospitals at all, and we'll make sure that they can do that, okay? Second, there's a conversation going on in terms of what this could do on policy. I'm going to tell you right now, if it does come through as something that we should consider, I can't even imagine the policy conversation in 2023 and 2024. I don't see this as a one-session policy discussion, but I do see it as a multi-year policy discussion. So what would a hospital do that's below the floor? Could they conceivably, quote, buy their way out of the problem? I think that's one way you could look at it. Another way to look at it is have you put a bogey on them that helps them understand the value of that innovation, the value of maybe not necessarily buying their way out. But let me say this. We know that federal law, they can't just say no to someone coming to the ER that has a broken arm, that has any type of, I'll say, life-threatening illness. They need to be cared for. So we know that there's laws that take care of the required care. But if there's extra and beyond care, if for some unknown reason they don't want to do that, well, that's a policy argument that we should all have in 23 and 24, but it's one that won't be answered by this bill, nor by the test. The test is assuming that all nonprofits are covered, and only nonprofits, and you don't have the sub in front of you, I apologize for that, but healthcare facility definition was changed back to last year's sub, and nonprofit is now in that, and I'll make sure that the committee gets it so you know that, in fact, this was intended for nonprofit. So I'll wrap it up, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the time, but in the end, we really have a choice here. And I would argue it's a choice that I hope you see as one that, you know what, it has a little hair on it. You may be getting conversations on the third floor in terms of what the challenges are. But ultimately, ask yourself this. Wouldn't it be great if every major policy move we made came with a test, came with an alpha, came with a beta? We have that chance here. We have a chance to see, could Georgia be the leader in indigent and charitable care, instead of, I would argue, someone who's somewhere in the middle of the pack. I believe our hearts are there. I believe our souls are there. I can't believe, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, that when you signed up to be on the ballot, that you didn't want to impact in some way, shape, or form the populace. Healthcare, education, these are the two areas that, frankly, impact every one of our citizens. Let's take the shot. Let's take the crack and see, would it work? If we can, great. And if it doesn't, I'll be the first to say we failed. Because trust me, at my company, we fail every day. So to us, it's not a badge of dishonor. It's actually a badge of honor, because now we've figured out a way not to do it, and we'll come back and we'll figure out a way to do it. That's all my comments right now, Mr. Chairman. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. And we're going to we have some questions here from our members. We'll begin with Representative Robichaux.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Todd, a couple of questions, and again, don't have the substitutes, so some of my questions might be mute, not understanding. Can you explain to me on line between 16 and 17 and then on line 24, under the charitable care credit by definition, you're calculating that at, I guess that's the top 150% of Medicaid allowable expenses, versus when we get to the charity care income threshold, the maximum there is a 200%. I think I just heard in your explanation you're going to vary that. Are those your tops, or would you explain to us why those were not consistent from your perspective?
Sure, that's a great question. To be completely frank with you, I think David Tatum from CHOA would actually be able to answer 16 and 17 better, but I think I'm going to do the best I can, and then I would ask for you to speak to Mr. Tatum afterwards. But in terms of what we wanted to be able to do was normalize. I can't speak for Northside, for Forsyth, and I can't speak for Piedmont, and I can't speak for Emory, but I do know this. The appendicitis isn't the exact same price at each one of those three. And I know there's 100 different reasons for that, so I'm not saying that as a negative. So what we wanted to do was normalize, and the normalization that we agreed to do was 150%. So that was basically in terms of us determining what the cost was so that we could determine the overall amount of, I'm going to say, charitable and indigent care in Georgia is, and I'm making up a number right now, $5 billion. But we couldn't do that until we normalized that number because we can't take the retail price from each one of the nonprofits.
Well, I guess we'll have a discussion on that, because what I read it as 150% of the Medicaid allowable costs, and those Medicaid allowable costs are set. It's not what the facility charges, it's what the maximum amount based on Medicaid reimbursement levels. But
No, and that's right. That's what I'm saying. We're going to take, I'll use appendicitis. Forgive me for being a bit pedantic here. Appendicitis at all three would typically be a different, I'll say, price. But to your point, the Medicaid, hold on, the Medicaid allowable cost, let's assume for a moment, is $1,000. Again, I'm just making that up. We're going to go ahead and put into the model that for all appendicitis, it's $1,500.
okay.
So that way, that allows us to be able to determine the overall amount of of indigent and charitable care.
And can I ask you a couple more questions?
Yeah, can I answer the 23 and 24 for you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So 23 and 24 is exactly, you're spot on. We want to see how amazing would it be if it turns out to be correct that we could go beyond the 138. If we can, let's see if we can get to 200. But we're going to go ahead and move the variables as much as we can to see what number actually could work. And again, we're not assuming it, we're just going to see. But you are right, we'll start at 2.
And then my next question is pertaining to lines number 26 through 29. In that, and again, in your presentation, you continue to mention hospitals, and I appreciate that they are one of the larger. But if I read that, it states that a healthcare facility, and again, we don't have the new version, nonprofit versus for-profit, but it says that it's as defined by the code, requiring those that require a certificate of need, including freestanding ambulatory centers, surgical centers, and imaging centers, and those whether or not they are exempt from obtaining a certificate of need under this chapter. So that's much more expansive than just hospitals, correct?
You are correct, and my apologies. I was using a generic phrase of hospitals. I should have been saying healthcare providers. In the sub, you'll see that we expressly put nonprofit in there. So that would be the roll-up. So for instance, my hospital is Northside Forsyth. They have surgical centers, for instance, so that would roll up underneath Northside. But not, I was asked in the hallway today, forgive me, I don't remember who asked, but someone asked me, would a privately owned surgical center roll into this system? And the answer is no.
Why not?
Because it's privately owned and they're already paying taxes.
Okay, so we're not going to calculate that, whether or not they're paying taxes. That would equate to the amount of indigent care they could possibly
No,
be
we're just going to
providing?
hit the nonprofits in terms of this particular system.
Okay. Representative Allen.
Okay, I think I'm on now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Todd, thank you for bringing this again. I know we've talked about it over the last couple of years, so some of these may be repetitive from last time, but I want to focus on process and level of effort, because I think that's where my concerns are. And I know you said, sure, to clarify, you look at it about 2 hours of total time for the hospitals to participate in the simulation. Lines 74 through 77 outline that there's a $1,000 penalty per facility that doesn't participate in those 2 hours. And I think you're underestimating the 2 hours only because there's also a level of effort in scrubbing and preparing the data to send to the entity that's going to run the simulation. Is that taken into account? And are you able to explain exactly what data you'll be needing to get from the facility?
So I think you make a great point in terms of the clarification. I think I conflated two things in terms of the participation in, I'll say the simulations versus the preparation for the simulation. So on the preparation for the simulation, and again, I do not pretend to know every back-end database inside of the state, so I'm going to assume that most of them sit on what's called some type of SQL back-end, so a relational database. We're going to basically ask for effectively a call where we are scrubbing out the identifier, which is typically, first, last name, social security number, things like that, and then we'll just get that dump of the database just into an FTP site. So that's really quirky, techie language for saying it's a database dump. And so, again, I'm not going to say that I know the skill set of every IT professional inside of each one of these hospitals, but I'll be generous. I expect the ones that are kind of on their game, they should be able to do that somewhere in the, I'll say, the hour time frame. Ones that are going to take a little bit longer probably might take them up to 4 hours. But like I said, we've arranged for in-kind folks to be able to come in and assist these folks. So if for some reason the LOE or the level of effort is too high, we do not want to be a burden. We get it. We just want to be able to pick up the claims level data all the way through so that we would be able to do, I'll say, the most transparent but most complete simulation.
So the other part of that, the concern I have on the process is for data security.
Sure.
We don't know the firm that's going to be doing it. We don't know if they're a covered entity. Do they have a BAA in place? What are the security methods? Because it's, I think you may be underestimating the ease of getting this data out of systems that are very complex and have disparate systems. To be able to dump this data and to be able to scrub it and make sure that there's no vulnerability of someone's information being out there with an organization that we don't have any type of agreements with or know who they are or any of that is of concern as someone that's in healthcare. And it's very alarming to think about giving all that data over for a simulation.
So could I respond to that? Yeah, so I don't want to speak for the department. The department, I will hope, I've never read their data security policies and their data privacy policies. I'm going to assume they're of the highest level. I do not know if they follow GDPR, CCPA. I don't know if they do BBB, Privacy Shield, you name it. But I'm going to assume for the purposes of this simulation that we're going to follow every one of those. If for some reason the department does not follow those, I would be shocked, but if they don't, I would insist and hope that they do. In terms of the in-kind contractors, I think that it's reasonable to assume that they would have to, just like any other healthcare outsourced provider in IT, we service a myriad of different healthcare facilities through my company. We have to sign a myriad of different things in terms of physical security, data security, cybersecurity, et cetera. And then on top of that, I know that there are a portion of the departments in the state of Georgia that unfortunately still host physical. I will tell you, it's perplexing to me. I don't know why we're hosting physical, but we'll see if they host physical or if they host in the cloud. And then at that point, then we have to put in the proper measures. That all being stated, I'm confident, based on, I'll say, standard data security and data privacy rules, regulations, processes, you name it. I think anything the department requires, I think, would be reasonable because we are dealing with personal data and we'd want to make sure that it's absolutely secure. We do not want to impact that in any way.
So, Mr. Chairman, two more things real quick. These are important. The other one is you keep mentioning the in-kind. Can you disclose who is the in-kind and how much are they investing in this simulation?
Yeah, so we just, and again, we went to a few folks and just said, hey, do you have the time to help in 2022 to make this happen? And they said, yeah, sure. I haven't gone through an exhaustive list of folks on my Rolodex. I would go ahead and do it myself in terms of my company, but I'm told that would be a conflict because I'm a legislator. But I'm happy to provide that to the committee. Okay.
Well, we speak the same language, so I'll just tell you, it sounds like we're going to open up a hackathon with personal data from healthcare providers to a group of people who just want to invest and test a method, and we don't know the insurability or the coverage of these people who are willing to sacrifice their time and give. And I just have, even when we get in-kind contributions, we have to disclose who it is and we know what's going on.
Of course.
This is a very sensitive issue that I think we need to think through before we just put it out for anybody that wants to run a simulation.
And my apologies if I made it seem as if we were going to open up a hackathon or even perceive to open up a hackathon. I would hope that my credibility with the body is high enough that in fact was not the intent.
But you should be able to list the people that you're talking with. Though.
Sure.
And
I think I can do that when I ask them formally. Remember, I asked them informally.
But you're asking us to pass something through, and we have no idea who we're going to be giving this data to, and you won't tell us.
Well, no, I will tell you when it's not a hearing only. I'm not hiding it or anything, but I'd like to be able to speak with them first and say, hey, it's official now. We got through the hearing.
I can't
We're now
vote on
up for a
anything
vote.
that's just going to, that I don't know who we're giving it to.
Sure, and I respect that. I'll get you the information that you need. No one is even trying to assume that there's going to be an open season on any of this data. It was my way of trying to be cordial. It was my way of trying to be polite. We heard consistently that there are a few hospitals that are having a challenge and having to furlough some folks in 2021. If that's the case, still in 2022, well, by all means, we want to make sure that we don't place any type of undue burden on them. That being stated, my apologies for not being completely crystal clear. I would never, ever recommend to the department, and remember, it would go through the department. It wouldn't go through me. I'm a legislator. It would go through the department. My recommendations to the department would have to be accepted. I would assume that they have a process, just like all the other companies that we work with, in terms of going through, looking at our SOC 1, looking at our SOC 2, looking at all the credentials of the individuals, and then basically determining, is that an entity capable of helping? If they are, terrific. If they're not, then we have to have further conversations on that. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that I was trying to address an issue that had been brought up in terms of a few of our hospitals, and I know that they're going through challenges, but I would never, and frankly, I hope that my reputation is such that I would never, ever put anyone's data at risk. Our whole job at my for-profit company is data. All we do all day, every day is terabytes of data. So we're very comfortable, and maybe my comfort with it was not portrayed because of the fact that I am so comfortable with it because I do it every day. So my apologies to the representative.
Representative McLeod.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Representative Jones, for presenting this bill. So let me first start by agreeing with you on the fact that we all come here with passions, and I do hope that the most important passion we have is for service to the people of the state of Georgia and our constituents. And so let me ask you, have you ever heard of the Affordable Care Act?
Sure.
Okay. Under the Affordable Care Act, there's an expansion of Medicaid?
I have, yeah.
Okay. And you said this, what you're trying to do is to come up with different ways to make sure that we can help in healthcare and expand Medicaid to 150, 200, 400%.
Well, not Medicaid, but
Other things.
Okay, sure.
Can we start by first just expanding Medicaid in the state of Georgia?
It's not for me to answer that. To me, like I said last year, that to me is a different policy discussion. I think it's a policy discussion that can continue to be had amongst the body. This is something that to me runs parallel to that policy discussion in terms of, is there a procedure, a process, a system that would allow us to reach that aspirational goal? At the same time, Representative McLeod, I would encourage you to continue down that policy line. I know you're a big advocate
Absolutely.
of expanding it. I respect that completely, and I would suggest continue to do that. Why this, to me, is a parallel path.
I don't see it the same way, but like I said, I do think that we should be looking at ways to help, but first let's try what we've got, period. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Representative Gamble.
Chairman, I appreciate your efforts here, and I know that your only goal is to figure out how we can do indigent care better. And so thank you for that, and we share that. I appreciate the conversations that we've been able to have about this. I am a little curious about the department and the cost with the pilot. I would imagine it would be minimal, but still there would be some cost associated with it. I know there could be the possibility of in-kind contribution of services by whomever it may be. But do you foresee there being any type of significant out-of-pocket cost for the department? And I guess would that be something we would have to account for in the FY22 or the FY22 supplemental budget, or am I totally off base on in that question?
I think Representative Gamble, I think you bring up a good point in terms of what would be the effort from the department. That has not been quantified. It's been inquired upon, but not quantified. I think it'd be folly for me to tell you it's zero. That's intellectually, I think, dishonest. At the same time, I think it'd be also folly for me to tell you it's $100 million. I think that's equally intellectually dishonest. I think at the end of the day, it is a low number. I can't quantify for you. We have inquired for it, though, so please don't feel like I'm trying to not give you the answer. I just don't want to say something on behalf of the department that I don't have in my possession.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to Mr. Jones. What are people who live in communities where the hospital buys indigent care credits instead of providing indigent care supposed to do to get access to hospital care?
Was the question, my apologies, Mr. Chair, and Representative Scott, was it, can you say it one more time? I apologize. It's 53 years old, you know.
Oh, okay.
They just don't work the way they used to.
You're young then. You're
Okay.
young. You're still young, man. You got a long way to go. Okay, so what are people who live in communities where the hospital buys indigent care credits instead of providing indigent care supposed to do to get access to hospital care? And what if they don't have a car to drive 30 miles to the hospital that chooses to provide that indigent care? What are those people supposed to do?
So, Representative Scott, it's a question. I like the hypothetical. That reminds me of law school in terms of the Socratic method. It's one that will be considered, in my opinion, once the test is done. If the test comes through and tells us this system can work, then by all means, Representative Scott, I think in 2023, we need to have the conversation about who's covered, how they're covered, incentives, disincentives, you name it. But I think that's definitely a policy discussion that this body would take up in 2023. All I'm asking for is your permission to just run the test. And I'll let that policy question come up in 2023.
Okay, may I ask another question? Okay, so is this just a workaround to Medicaid expansion, which would dramatically reduce indigent care costs on hospitals statewide?
I don't see it as necessarily a workaround. Until we know the results of the test, Representative Scott, I think it's impossible to determine what the actual, I'll say, contribution could possibly be for those citizens in the state of Georgia who need access to care like this. So I think the best answer I can give you is, let's do the test, let's determine what it does, if anything. Like I said, I fail every day. I fail multiple times a day. Let's see if this one would actually succeed, and if it does, then let's have that question in terms of, is it a replacement? Is it complementary to? I think those are all conversations that, if it's successful, we should definitely have in 2023.
Okay, folks, here's what we're going to do. We have 4 members waiting to ask questions, and we actually have several guests here today that want to speak to this measure as well. So I'm going to ask our members to ask your questions. Try to make it succinct, and to the sponsor as well, make it succinct, because we have another very important measure to take up today after this bill. And we're getting close to crossover day, and we want to make sure we're able to educate today so that we can come back Monday and consider any of these measures. Okay, Representative Byrd.
Thank you very much. I have to say, obviously you've worked on this for quite a while. This is new to me. So I get out of your bill right now, it's a pilot program. It's something to do with indigent care. And on the third part, on lines 74 through 77, that you would mandate healthcare facilities to participate in this pilot program, and if they did not, it would cost them $1,000. Is that part correct? And maybe we should discuss your bill offline, because I really don't know what I'm going to vote on or what I'm listening to right now.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Representative Byrd, thank you. You are correct. In order for us to be successful in the pilot, we need all the data, not some of the data. And the reason why, oh, sorry. What is your data? The data is the claims level data. So hypothetically, there's only 2 hospitals in the state of Georgia. They each had 100 patients each, and they all conveniently only had one problem with them. So we would get 100 claims from one, 100 claims for the other. Clearly, it's not nearly that simple. But, you know, it would be, we need that claims level data. We need it for everyone. It doesn't work, meaning the simulation doesn't work if we don't have everybody. It's no different than, you know, I'm going to play a football game with 20, not 22. It doesn't work. In terms of the penalty, it says up to. We wanted to give the discretion to the department in terms of, I'd love to just use a carrot. I was thinking, is there any possible way to give money if you participated instead of take money if you didn't? I tend to be more of a carrot than a stick, but in this case, we couldn't think of something creative that would be a carrot versus a stick. If you have something offline, I'm willing to listen to it from an amendment or a substitute point of view. But yeah, I'm happy to chat with you offline to let you know exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish here. But again, like I said, it's a test. You're welcome.
Representative Bazemore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague, Representative Jones. So my question is the data that is needed to run this test not already in the possession of DCH, since our penalty model for indigent care is based on the amount of care provided yearly?
So Representative Bazemore, this is something that has popped up, I'd say, over the last 3 to 5 days, that question. I inquired with the department, as you can probably imagine, because if we had the data, trust me, I would not be on this pedestal, on this dais, not because I don't love you guys, but you have other things to do, as do I. As far as I know, and I'm going to ask again, but you have my word, I have asked, and I've been told we don't have the claims level data. If that's not the case, and you know different, and I mean this sincerely, working together as colleagues, I'd love to know, but I will inquire with the department again, just to double down on that to ensure that in terms of the things we need for the simulation, that the department doesn't already have that. The commissioner was on the study committee, and the commissioner obviously became aware of what it is that we need vis-a-vis the 4 or 5 study committee meetings that we had. So I just want to make sure that you knew that the commissioner was on that study committee. And again, if that claims level data exists, it would be absolutely a pleasant surprise, something that as a businessman you don't always get, but it would definitely be one that I would take. So thank you.
The sponsor may have an opportunity that we have DCH speaking to this bill shortly, and you may have an opportunity to ask just that question.
All right.
Remotely, we have Representative Mitchell. Representative Mitchell, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm coming at this from a research perspective. I worked in public health research for a long time. And I certainly understand and appreciate the desire to be innovative as well. I understand how simulations work and the evaluation of big data from healthcare in a simulation framework. I've been involved in several analytic teams working on healthcare data where they attempt to both clean and then de-identify that data and then build it into a simulation. In my experience, this problem is non-trivial and takes both time and quite a great deal of resources. As well, simulations at the level of state healthcare data are going to be extremely complex. I'm curious why you choose to design a pilot with full data from all facilities and what your expectations would be for time frame for data turnover and analytics. For example, one project I have been on a team that was working with from just one hospital system took over 2 years to clean and turn over that data. So I'm a little bit curious how this scales and the true financial impact of a pilot like this, because I anticipate it's actually quite large.
Okay, well, thank you, Representative Mitchell. Let's first go back to first principles. If the problem is, as was stated 2 years ago in this room, and I do believe it to be the case, and that was the problem by the industry laying out all of our challenges regarding finances around healthcare. If the problem is in fact that large, I ask, is the effort worth? If the problem as defined by the industry isn't as large, then the question becomes, why the testimony 2 years ago? But I do believe it is. I do believe they were being honest, and I do believe they were being forthright, and I appreciate that. If that's the challenge, then the question becomes, challenges that are that complex with that many moving parts require us to be able to look at answers that may take a certain amount of brain power. So I agree with you, Representative Mitchell. Oh, sorry. I agree with you, Representative Mitchell. I think that we are going to have to truly use the brain power that we have access to. I hope not just within the department, but within the body and even within the industry. But I think ultimately, I do believe that the effort is absolutely worth it to determine, can we find a solution for the folks who have laid out for us their major challenge, which is funding. I know we got to go.
Representative Wynn, last member question. Representative Wynn, and then Mr. Kibler, you'll be on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Jones, I think we're all in agreement here that we do have to find a solution to the large number of Georgians who live without insurance. My question is, under Medicaid expansion, we would automatically have federal funding that could be drawn down that would supplement and support the financial needs that we have. So under a pilot program like yours, we don't know the fiscal cost, but would it have any additional funding, or would the state fully have to pay for it?
My apologies, Mr. Chair. Do you know what the question? Like, I heard most of Representative Wynn's question, but
yeah, Representative Wynn, can you ask again, maybe a shorter version of the question?
Sure. Under Medicaid expansion, we do have federal funding that would support Medicaid expansion to offset the fiscal cost. And we know your bill, Representative Jones, would have a fiscal cost to it. So under this program, would we have access to federal funding, or would this be paid for solely by the state?
Oh, I apologize. Okay, now I heard it. I think the question is sourcing of that funding. Yeah, Representative Wynn, several of the representatives from industry have asked me, as a matter of fact, demanded, and I think it's a fair demand on their part, they've asked me to ensure that we do not touch or risk federal funding. So one of the parts of the pilot will be ensuring that not only would the system work, but also the efficacy and the ability to draw down certain federal funds. So we do not want to risk that. So I want to be very clear, no one is even suggesting risking any of the federal money that's currently moving to the state.
Thank you, and thank you, Representative Wynn. Okay, now, again, Mr. Tim Kibler. We will also hear next from Mr. Ethan James, and then, I believe remotely, Ms. Brandy Sylvan with the department. Mr. Kibler, thank you for being here, sir.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chair? No.
Either way. Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a 3 o'clock that I need to present a bill at. I just want to let you know that
Perfectly
I'm gonna be
fine.
here.
I think
Okay.
at this point, you're free to go. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Mhm.
Thank you.
Mr. Kibler? Yes, sir. Please. It makes it a whole lot easier for guys like me to hear when you do. Thank you.
Than I do. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Now I have to move back. I want to say thanks to the committee for allowing us to testify today. I am Tim Kibler with the Georgia Alliance of Community Hospitals, which is Georgia's not-for-profit hospitals. We're about an 85 hospital member association. All of our members and their management companies are not-for-profit, so this bill would be directly impacting each and every one of our institutions. We had a conversation both last year and this year about this issue, and at this point, I'm not aware of any hospital that supports this sort of a program to try to address our economic shortfall. As has been stated by a couple of folks, there are several other ways that potentially could bring a lot more resources to the state. that would help address would more completely address the shortfalls that our institutions are facing. And in fact, it was suggested to me today, I'm going to open up a whole other can of worms, but that in fact, if we put a casino amendment in front of the voters and they pass it, and we dedicate those funds to Medicaid and indigent care, it will be a much more vast collection of resources to address the needs of our indigent and poor patients. So I would encourage the committee at their leisure to consider that approach. We do have a significant fundamental difference of agreement or difference of perspective with the chairman as to the appropriateness of creating a financial incentive essentially for a hospital to not provide care. As he said, all of our hospitals are going to be seeing anybody that comes in the emergency room. We're going to give them the best care that we possibly can in each of those institutions. That'll continue to happen regardless of what is done here. But we do want to make sure that the state does everything it can to help encourage people to provide care to those folks in their community that need it and not offer them sort of another route to go. The practical concerns that a couple of committee members have raised are concerns that we share. Obviously, we don't want to put anyone's health information at risk at any point in this process. I am fearful that the claims for each potential treatment regime would be a fairly comprehensive list and very difficult to do in the time frame that Chairman Jones believes it can be done in. But again, he is much more knowledgeable about IT than I am. But it's not been my experience that these kind of things can be done quickly and easily. And I'm grateful that he's tried to find some people to potentially help with assist in those. But I am very fearful about the additional burden that we'd be putting on our member institutions who are already at this point significantly challenged. In the light of the other issue that you're going to try to take up, Mr. Chairman, I won't take any more time. I'm glad to try to answer any questions from any of the committee members. We would very much, we appreciate the committee's time and your willingness to listen, and we are at this point still very much opposed to this bill and ask that it not move forward at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Kibler. And again, our duty here, my belief, is to educate, learn, discover, and to do that, we have to hear both sides. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ethan James with the Georgia Hospital Association, and then we'll hear from Ms. Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay? I wanted to take a little bit of time because I don't think that the hospital industry has had enough time to explain them. I'm disappointed that Representative Jones did have to leave because I don't know that he's really heard our feedback on this legislation. And not to disparage Representative Jones because I know he is a very smart, very learned man. You know, he came to me first, I think almost 3 years ago, wanting to do a study committee on this idea. Told me where he got the idea, how he came about it. And I told him at that time, and I would say it again right now. I said it last year during a very brief hearing on this idea in the Special Access Committee. I told him that this was very, very interesting. This is an interesting outside-the-box idea. But the problem with outside-the-box thinking or an outside-the-box approach is that you don't know what's going on inside the box all the time. Inside this box of the hospital industry, it's 10 million patient encounters every year. It's 150,000 employees, and Representative Jones mentioned that a few of our hospitals are having some struggles during the pandemic, having to lay off some employees. Every single hospital is struggling during this pandemic. Let me be clear, it's not a few hospitals struggling during the pandemic. Every community, every hospital struggles. He did mention the 10 to 15% Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement shortfalls. That's going on inside the box. I'm glad he recognizes that. But even in spite of those shortfalls, even in spite of all the challenges, we have groundbreaking and life-saving care at every single hospital in Georgia, especially during this pandemic. Life-saving care going on during this pandemic with all the other challenges. Most importantly, we have more than $2 billion in uncompensated care. This legislation, he talked about funding, he talked about the financial resources, the struggles that our hospitals have, especially some of our small rural hospitals have in coming up with capital with those resources. But this legislation does not consider that this is not adding new resources to anybody. This is just moving resources around the system, moving it around the hospitals. I dare say it's moving deck chairs around on the Titanic, especially because what we have is a Titanic problem. This is an enormous problem, indigent charity care. Again, more than $2 billion annually. Again, when Representative Jones first approached me 3 years ago about this, and we talked about it again, I told him it was very interesting. He said he wanted to do a study committee. He started that study committee. A couple of our hospital members, both for-profit and not-for-profit, were part of that study committee. They met once. He presented his idea. He told them to go back and think about it. They met the second time under the auspices. When they left the first one, he said, come back to the second meeting. We're going to have a model that we can show you how it works. And that's what he continued to sell to me. I'm going to show you how this works. Well, that second meeting came along. They didn't come up with a model. They didn't do anything. But at the end of that, because he wasn't getting the feedback that I think he hoped for, and I'm not trying to speak for Representative Jones, certainly, they never finished that study committee. They disbanded, never met a third time, never produced a study committee report. I say that because I think Representative Jones is not looking for the hospital feedback on this. And this is something that I continue to plead with policymakers. We are here as good partners to help you. You've seen it during the pandemic. Hospitals are partnering with the state to solve problems. We want to do these things with you. We don't want them done to us. We want them done with us. Include us in the process. Ask for our feedback. But to, I think, Mr. Kibler's point, not a single hospital supports this. Not a single hospital has given feedback saying, this is a good idea, we should try this. We have nothing else going on. We need to participate in this game, this simulation. But hospitals are also kind of doing this already. The state has this program through the ICTF, the Indigent Care Trust Fund. There is a charity care threshold of 3%. Every hospital must do that. In fact, most healthcare facilities, even private, for-profit ambulatory surgery centers, have to meet that indigent charity care level. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I thought you were beckoning to me. Thank you.
No,
They have to meet
continue,
this
Mr. James. I was just waving to the chair lady, letting her know we're getting there. We're pretty close. Go ahead.
The indigent charity care level exists, and hospitals, if they don't do it, they pay a fine to the state. The good thing about that, the very rare instances that even an AmSurge facility may not meet that, is that it goes through the Indigent Charity Care Trust Fund. It draws down federal matching dollars. This is important. This bill no longer speaks to how that would be done. Past iterations did indicate that this would take place, the exchange would take place through the Indigent Charity Care Trust Fund. That can't work, and I'm glad that this does not use that as a mechanism for this exchange any longer, because certain private not-for-profit hospitals wouldn't be able to do it that way because it would violate anti-kickback statutes. Regardless, this new concept would be a burden on our hospitals, especially because, as I mentioned, there is existing 3% charity care floor that the department does enforce. The department already has this data. It is fully available to Representative Jones. I don't know about his conversation with Commissioner Berry, but that data is available. I wonder why Representative Jones, and I've suggested this to him for 3 years in a row, get access to that data from the department. You twist the knobs and pull the levers. You figure out how you think it's going to work. don't burden us to try to interpret how you hope it's going to work, because we still haven't seen a model. We still haven't seen exactly how he's going to run this program, and I thank Representative Allen for his mentioning the security concerns. I think that's something I hadn't thought about, but it's a very salient point. Again, this doesn't do anything to solve the uninsured crisis, but what it does do is, I think it's very sad that I almost feel that this commoditizes poor patients. These are people we treat, human beings with real suffering, real problems, illnesses, and injuries. They are not credits. I know Representative Jones does not mean to come across that way. I just can't get it out of my mind. The commoditization of poor people, like some sort of stock market for uninsured. In fact, during one of his original iterations that he discussed with me, he actually talked about the credits turning into futures and how they could trade that and all the different stock market mechanisms that could work for this. I can't get that out of my head. I don't have his new sub, but I do have the sub where it's a healthcare facility that would apply to both not-for-profit hospitals and for-profit hospitals. I want to make something clear, and I think this is important for all policymakers to understand. Not-for-profit hospitals, and the Georgia Hospital Association represents almost every hospital in the state. For-profit, not-for-profit, small, medium, large, big systems, critical access hospitals, specialty hospitals, you name it. Not-for-profit hospitals do pay taxes. They pay employment taxes. They pay property taxes and sales taxes on non-clinical supplies and property. They do pay enormous taxes. Likewise, I think it's important to point out, because I think the inference he is making here is that not-for-profit hospitals are the only ones that provide indigent charity care. Let me tell you, my for-profit members provide enormous amounts of indigent charity care. This is a very important point. He mentioned maybe if certain rich hospitals could reach out and buy a small, struggling hospital. That happens right now. The bigger hospital system recognizes that if a small rural hospital 3 counties away were to close, shut its door because it can no longer withstand the financial losses, the hospital goes away. The patients do not go away. The patients now have to travel 3 counties to come to that bigger hospital, and they get sicker, and their injury gets worse, perhaps life-threatening. So that big hospital wants to save that little hospital. Very often, they want to reach out and make sure that that community still has close-to-home care. We had a legislator who's long retired now, years ago, in the other chamber, mentioned to me that there are too many hospitals in Georgia. We have more than 180 hospitals. He said there are too many hospitals in Georgia. Tell me which one we're going to say we don't need you, especially now. Can you imagine having fewer hospitals? We've lost 12 hospitals have closed over the last decade due to financial losses they couldn't withstand any longer. Can you imagine picking out a few more saying, we don't need you during this pandemic? We don't need you when you've had an accident and it's life-threatening and maybe you have to drive another 30 miles to a hospital, or you've had a stroke or a heart attack. We need all these hospitals. And our big hospitals, our for-profit, our not-for-profit, doesn't matter. We want all these hospitals and we want them to sustain. But moving deck chairs around the Titanic is not going to do it. Because, and again, Representative Jones did mention this, there are different reasons that hospitals struggle financially. Yes, it may be uninsured patients in one community, but another community, they may have a large Medicare population that they're not getting full costs in reimbursement for, but low indigent care, and suddenly they're not meeting this new floor of indigent charity care credits that Representative Jones envisions, but they're also having to pay, they're losing money, but they're also having to pay to buy indigent charity care credits, when really it's maybe a Medicare problem. It's, again, we'd love to talk about this offline, not having, again, as he envisions, 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 hours of time, no hospital CEO is going to seriously approach something like this and spend 2 hours on it. They're going to prepare for it. They're going to use all the resources they have available, including their IT, their commercial, their insurance managers, all their staff, and they're going to prepare for this. This is going to make tremendous resources to prepare for this simulation. But we still don't understand how it works. You know, I'm also disappointed in the timing of this again, and Representative Jones did acknowledge that and say this would be pushed off to next year. But the timing of this, all his focus for 3 years now, instead of working with the department and figuring out exactly how this might work, all his focus, the remaining focus on pushing this forward, when hospitals are focused now on the other issue that y'all are considering for weeks now, hospital visitation policy, getting that right, bringing families back together with their loved ones, family-centered care. We're dealing with vaccinations, getting enough vaccines into our communities, making sure everybody has the care they need as hospitals are overflowing with patients still. This is just a tremendous burden. I dare say it doesn't include the hospitals in the process. We are asking him, this doesn't work for us. Please don't do this. And I would ask you to do the same. This does not work for the hospital community. Again, happy to work with Representative Jones offline and the department to model this, but not at the expense of time and resources of our hospital members, especially right now. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. James. We're going to go very briefly. We have another very important bill, and the chair lady is here waiting. We're going to go very briefly remotely to Brandy Sylvan with the Department of Community Health. Ms. Sylvan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brandy Sylvan. I serve as the Director of Government Relations for the Department of Community Health. We've certainly been interested in this concept since Representative Jones first presented it a few years ago. As he mentioned, our commissioner served on the study committee that examined this issue. And I think at that time, as well as now, one of our biggest concerns remains that there's a lot of vagueness associated with the way this is written. And that's going to create a lot of challenges for us from an implementation standpoint. I have not seen the sub, so I am speaking to the most recent version that I'd seen online. But currently, the bill would require the department to establish a floor for each healthcare facility, to determine the value of an indigent care credit, and to develop a platform for trading credits. The department does not have existing staff and resources to implement these changes. There is no appropriation associated with the bill. And I know Representative Gamble had asked about the expense, and Representative Jones mentioned that we had been, that inquiry had been submitted. So there has not been a fiscal note requested on this bill. We were asked what the cost would be, but even that has been difficult for us to approximate, given that there's not a lot of specifics laid out in this legislation. Additionally, the department would be required to submit a report, which in part includes an evaluation of the effectiveness of the pilot. Without a clearly defined goal, this is going to be a very difficult measure it will be difficult to measure success and identify recommendations for any improvements. We did have concerns about the definition of healthcare facility in the most recent version, so I'm not sure if that has been addressed already in this sub. But there was the inclusion of several facilities that are not currently subject to indigent and charity care requirements. Notably nursing homes, it does not make sense given their payer mix that they would provide indigent and charity care. Were the pilot deemed to be a success and implemented fully, it's also not clear what the exchange of funds would look like and how that would operationally take place. As Ethan mentioned, we're not entirely sure what impact that could have on the Indigent Care Trust Fund and our ability to draw down federal dollars. And finally, I wanted to speak to the question of data. So I have heard discussions about, does the department have the data? But it's never really been clearly defined what data it is that would be beneficial here. I'm not aware of any request from Representative Jones to the department. But what data we would have is Medicaid and SHBP claims. But obviously that would be compensated care. So that would not really fall under the scope of what this is looking to address. We have the annual hospital financial survey, which is where the hospitals do report that amount of indigent and charity care that they provide. I'm more than the department is more than happy to work with anybody that can provide us a more specific outline of what data would be beneficial to this conversation. So in general, the department, we are very much committed to improving access to health care for all Georgians. And anything that is going to move the ball forward on that, we are, interested in working on. But this bill, as it's written, is going to be very difficult for us to implement. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sylvan. Very helpful, and you answered a question that I had prepared to ask you about the data, as was alluded to earlier. So thank you very much. We are going to move on to the next matter. Thank you so much. I think all of our members have been thoroughly educated today by hearing both sides on Representative Jones' House Bill 261. That is our process here. We study and we learn first, and then we go from there. Chair Lady Cooper will now present House Bill 605. House Bill 605. Chair Lady, right here at the podium. Yes, and anyone else you would like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have with me Leah Aldridge, who is an esteemed healthcare attorney and who is working for me. Because I wasn't a lawyer, and this is such an important issue, as we negotiated with other lawyers on this bill, I felt like it was important for me to have somebody basically who was neutral and on the issue and not representing any corporation or any nursing home facility or assisted living facility. So Leah's with me in case the questions become very legal. This bill is about the camera bill in nursing home facilities, assisted living facilities, and other such facilities across our state. We've had these bills before and they've never gone anywhere, but over the summer and this past year, our Supreme Court ruled in a case where there was a death that the camera videos and their audio were admissible in court. So right now, it's sort of, everything is just open. And so you say, might say to yourself, well, why are we doing anything about it? And the reasons to the legislators, as you know down here, anytime something's wide open, people begin to talk about maybe making some changes to it. And as I begin to hear those out in the hallway and across the aisle over in the Senate side and House, it sounded like they wouldn't be the kind of changes that as a patient advocate I would want. Because Georgia families, because of this pandemic, are extremely worried about their families and their loved ones and what's going on in these facilities. And so I have tried to craft a bill that is very transparent and very open about access to and installing video cameras in residence rooms in order for families to check on their patients and their loved ones. That offers patient safety and family peace of mind when they do it. I've worked on, this is a compromise bill, and in developing it, I looked at 13 other states that have such laws. So this bill protects patient privacy rights. It facilitates safety and quality care for our vulnerable citizens, but it does not put unduly burdens on our elderly care facilities. We can't do without these facilities. We must have assisted living facilities across our state. We must have nursing homes across our state. We need all of these different types of facilities to care for our elderly patients and people who can no longer live on their own. And we want the best of care in these facilities, but they also can't have unduly burdens placed upon them, because if we do, we will facilitate the closing. So it is a fine line to walk between balancing patient safety and access to care. So let me walk you through the bill, if you have your bills with you. I will start off by saying that lines 37, it's where we require a written consent form from both the resident and any roommate prior to placement of an electronic monitoring device. Many of the nursing homes, the rooms are 2 patients to a room. So the person wanting the camera, or their family wanting the camera, needs to respect the privacy rights of the other patient in that room. And so we have put out consent forms, which will allow, and it allows the patient, not the facility, to opt in or out of monitoring at certain times. Like the patient that wants the camera, that the camera be on, can say, I want it cut off when I'm bathing, or I want it cut off when my lawyer comes to visit, or my pastor comes to visit. And the rest of the time, I want the camera on. So it puts that decision to be made by the patient. On lines 80 to 84, we address the patient's decision-making capacity. You know, there are some patients in these facilities that have lost the ability to make this type of decision for themselves. And we give, you know, and set up a pathway where a family member or someone who has been given the power of attorney, and I believe it's called power of healthcare power of attorney for healthcare, can make that decision. On lines 103 to 124, we address the practical issues of what happens when a roommate disagrees on a monitoring device, so that the person who wants it still has a way to have some means that their family can still see what's happening to them. You know, if the roommate says, no, I don't want anything in this room, that could keep the other patient from having monitoring. So what we did is we set it up. If that's the case, the camera would be only on the person that wants it, and it would not be audio, it would just be visual. That would be the compromise in that case. I think practically that will be an unusual situation, but we didn't want that to occur and keep somebody that wanted, you know, some family that wanted to be able to see what was happening to their loved one, to not be able to do that. On lines 133 to 141, we make it clear that electronic monitoring devices may not be turned off or hampered with in any way other than provided by the written consent form. And once again, that is the patient making the decision on what they want it, if they want it turned off at all, or the person that has the right to make that kind of decision for the patient. Importantly, we do not, on lines 142 through 160, we do not alter the rules of civil procedures and evidence in considering the admissibility of any recordings. But we do require that sharing of any videos with the facility, that upon their request, if a demand letter is sent or a complaint is filed. So, you know, we make sure that any of the recordings, and we make sure they are inadmissible as evidence, but also that if there is a demand letter or upon request, that the facility also can see what's on those videos. And finally, we provide that facilities shall not be responsible for violations of rights of privacy associated with video monitoring, lines 161 and 170. And conversely, a facility may not discriminate against residents for using a monitoring device. So it's a compromise bill, but patients' rights are protected. I can tell you that the reason this bill is coming to you at a fairly late stage is because there were numerous decisions between the association's lawyer and myself, and along with Mrs. Aldridge, and there was back and forth. And as I had said to probably they were sick, remember, I am a patient advocate. I am here for the patient and the patient's family. And if you read this bill, I think it'll come through clear and loud. So to conclude, it's a compromise bill. It provides an easy-to-follow process for families to openly place an electronic monitoring device in the room of a family member in an elder care facility. It addresses and protects the rights of residents and roommates, addressing mental competency and privacy rights. It addresses several practical matters like cost and installation, and it addresses the use of the recordings obtained but does not alter or restrict the admissibility of the recordings in a court of law. And I believe we've really struck the right balance with the protection of our elderly citizens taking first place. But as I said, it shouldn't put an undue burden on facilities. So there are things in the bill in these different sections, like if you're going to put a video camera, then you're responsible for paying for it. If putting in the kind of Wi-Fi or whatever you need damages a wall, then you're responsible for repairing that wall or having it painted again. This type of practical type thing is, the responsibility of the patient, not the home. So I'll be glad, that's it in a nutshell, going through all the different sections, but I'll be glad to answer questions. And if I can't answer them, Mrs. Aldridge will for you.
Thank you, Chair Lady Cooper. We have several questions. Representative Robichaud.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman Cooper. This is a good bill for those patients and family members and residents. But I guess I just have one question, and maybe it's more of the legal or the technology. My understanding, and it's been shown in case that, so when I see the audio recording device, so I'm assuming like an Alexis type.
I'm sorry.
So I think it's a good bill, Chairman Cooper, and thank you for bringing this. It's needed. My only concern is in the definition on line 2021, an audio recording device. I'm assuming it's something like an Alexis system, where you can, that's what we're talking about. You can record, because my understanding is those types of systems are always recording, even when turned off, if they're hooked in to the internet. So how, and I appreciate the concept of the privacy needs of that. It needs to be turned off per the patient's perspective when X is happening. How is that going to be accomplished, or am I misunderstanding something?
Pardon? Okay. She's talking about the Alexis, supposedly is recording.
An Alexis type system.
And other types are always recording even if they're turned off. Mm-hmm. And so we have said, like, if you're in a room and the roommate doesn't want it, we've said it would be not audio. Mm-hmm. And so she's asking about.
Yeah, I think the question is, there are devices such as Alexa and others that are kind of always on and always recording, if you will, and how do devices like that relate to this bill and the requirement of notification and posting and so forth that would encumber all of that?
Good afternoon. My name is Leah Aldridge. I am a member of the Georgia Bar, and thank you very much for allowing me to address the committee, and Chairman Petrie for allowing me to address the committee. And thank you for your question. I'm not familiar with that specific device that you're referring to. I will tell you that 13 other states that have considered this have not actually had that technology addressed within the bill itself. And I certainly believe that we can come back to this issue. Yep. Okay, so I know there's been other circumstances where they've been disconnected, and maybe someone else has something to add to this, but where they've been covered or disconnected. There's two different places in the law that we've addressed this. One is that when a roommate does not consent to any type of recording device, the resident may ask the facility for a transfer to a different room. We did anticipate there could be a delay in the facility's ability to move a resident. And so we were trying to provide a balance here where the family could still monitor video only, so long as the camera or the device could be placed to record the resident exclusively. For example, this could require the resident and a roommate to switch beds. So if the camera could be positioned to only record the resident and then not pick up any audio conversations that perhaps the roommate did not give permission. Madam Chair worked very hard to balance the privacy rights of patients, the interest of families to protect their family members, as well as the interest of the facilities in trying to maintain and balance all of these rights.
Thank you, Ms. Aldridge. That very good question from Representative Robichaux. Perhaps when we come together, likely on Monday, we can think about devices like Alexa and others in that family, and maybe we can have Ms. Aldridge just investigate that further. Okay, Representative McLeod has a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Cooper, I believe I saw this bill last year. I don't know who the author is exactly, but it was a good bill last year, so it's a good bill now. And I want to make sure people understand the crux of this is basically to protect patients from abuse. And with regards to the lawsuit that you're referring to, or several lawsuits, what was the issue that really kind of made you feel more galvanized to bring this bill forward? What was the circumstances of the patient that ended up in court? And I suppose it was the person.
It didn't have anything to do with that. It had that, when a bill is open and, there's no parameters set about how it's used or anything, it's always open for somebody to come in and try through a legislator, House or Senate, to put parameters in. And what I was hearing is there was talk about coming with bills that would not have protected patient rights and family rights like this one did. That, maybe they would say, if this and such happens, it's not admissible in court. You can't use the video or the audio in court. So I made sure that that kind of parameter wasn't put on this bill. So that's what motivated me to go forth and put parameters in that were patient-friendly when others were being discussed that might have gone the other way.
Okay, I don't have the other bill in front of me, but which sections did you add, made additions to this bill? Because it just seemed a lot like the one that I read last year.
Oh, that Demetrius did? I mean, I didn't read the bill last year, so.
Okay, which
and
section
so,
did you?
Representative, we have a lot of questions. Representative McLeod, what I can tell you is this. Having seen the bill, haven't seen that last year's bill. This is a different version of this bill. The issue that was most a concern before was an issue of privacy, and indeed, our long-term care ombudsman were opposed to the previous measure because of privacy concerns. That is my recollection. I know you've tackled it from a different direction,
okay.
And the chair lady was not involved at that time.
Right.
But the previous version that we had Medicaid funds in it, and it had major privacy concerns that were coming from the long-term care ombudsman, and I'm sure we'll hear from them on this measure
right. And Demetrius
going forward.
And Demetrius has signed on to this bill.
Very good. Okay, Representative LaHood.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative McLeod, that was a good question you asked, and as a provider myself, I can tell you that one of the things that makes this bill so necessary now, when maybe it wasn't such a priority in the past, is the pandemic has taught us things, and it's taught us that separation from families does matter. It is a big deal, and with the modernization of technology and the advancement of our knowledge now, it just has highlighted the importance of having this virtual connection to families. And also as a provider and as a man with family who has used long-term care services before for family members, I see both sides, and I try to look at this with balanced eyes, and I want to praise Chairman Cooper for working with all the players on this to come up with a balanced bill, and that gives consumers a lot of what they've been asking for, and it also gives providers, some protections in that if the bill becomes overly burdensome to providers, then it's going to be difficult for them to comply and to focus on providing quality care that they're charged to provide. A lot of the people in these long-term care settings are there because their families either are unable and in some cases unwilling to provide the services that the long-term care folks are providing. So I think it's a good balanced approach here. It's a good start, and I appreciate Representative Demetrius Douglas in the past, getting the conversation started. That was a big part of where we are today. So thank you.
Well, and
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Go ahead, Chair Lake.
I will tell you that I'm a firm believer in the cameras. And I believe I signed on to Representative Demetrius' bill last time, but wasn't involved in any of the discussions about what happened or where it went after that. So I couldn't answer your question, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing that. But I am a firm believer in the cameras because it's a little bit like the police cameras. When police officers first started wearing, or they were very resistant to use the body cams, but they've become much more familiar with them and the advantage to wear them because they serve two purposes. They catch officers that are overly aggressive in how they police, but they also protect officers when they're accused of something they didn't do. And when you're dealing with elderly patients, I will tell you that if you go to raise an elderly patient up in bed, and two providers take a hold on either side of the bed and take a hold of their arm and their hands, and put a hand under their hips to try to lift them up. You can easily have an elderly patient who will have really bad bruises on their arms because their skin is so thin and so fragile, and sometimes it'll even tear and bleed. Was that due to excessive rough care and mishandling? A camera would tell you that. Or did they do everything like they should have had, and it was because the patient was elderly and their skin that way? So I think that, like I say, I'm a big proponent of this, cameras and being able to see what happens. I mean, I will tell you, I have said before, even though I wasn't working on this issue, that when I put my sweet Sophie, before she passed away last summer, my corgi, rescue corgi, in daycare, I could, on my camera sitting on the floor of the house, see what she was doing. And I never did because I trusted them. But if I had wanted to see what kind of care she was getting, I could have looked at it any time while I was here in the chamber. I think families deserve to be able to see our loved ones also. And so I think it's a protective for both the homes and the patients when the bill is written it right, and I have really tried hard to do that. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, quite all right. We're here to learn. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, my question one, I was going to ask a question about that, or make a statement about the protection of even the institution and the staff, because I think that is so important. As a coroner for Forsyth County for 16 years, I've had the complaints and also investigated some abuse in some nursing homes in our area, and of course having a camera system would have helped that and expedited that investigation. Even in my own personal business, I have cameras, and I've had somebody complain that a piece of jewelry was gone. Of course, I brought the family in, showed them the whole visitation, and it was never taken off by an individual. So anyway, my question is, how is the camera system going to work, and who controls it? And is it off a Wi-Fi system of the institution? And that I just
no, it's in the bill. The patient's responsible for it. If the institution wanted to provide something, then, you know, they could put a reasonable charge on it, but it's up to the patient, and the facility is not required to, you know, provide this service.
But most of these work off a Wi-Fi type system. Where is it going to get enough bandwidth and Wi-Fi if you've got 120 rooms in a facility and 120 rooms?
And they, you know, they kept telling me, okay, it's
Really?
on,
Okay.
starting on line 93, explains how to, you know, the network and connection, or the internet, what they do about it, starting with line 93.
Okay, I'll read that.
Okay.
I just, you know, I hadn't read the bill, so I'm just kind of thinking out loud from going in nursing homes a lot.
Well, I can tell you, I'm not like Representative Robichek, who knows all about, you know, the, what'd you call it? Alexis. I don't own an Alexis, you know, but they said something about hot spots, and as we discussed that there were all different methods that they could use to connect this. So we did put how it would be handled.
Well, thank you for the bill. I think it's a great bill that, as an advocate for patients' rights, goes parallel with our HB 290 for protecting our patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And again, I know everybody has not quite read the bill. It dropped lately, and so it's time to study and to ask questions. That's what we're here for. Representative Scott has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Cooper, for bringing this bill, because I am a big advocate of families being able to see what's going on with their loved ones, and definitely in nursing home facilities. So I would just like to say thank you for bringing this bill. I think it's a good bill, and I think that the people would love to have this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Scott. I really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, Representative Scott. Representative Mitchell is remote, Chair Lady Cooper, and she has a question.
Where'd I look?
Representative Mitchell?
Sorry, I think I turned up huge whenever I turned on my camera. I just wanted to say thank you for this bill. I do think this will bring a lot of peace of mind to a lot of families who are right now unable to see their loved ones in care. I had a question about privacy for patients versus families. So while the family gets to see the patient, if you have a representative for you, do you then not get to choose on your own whether your camera is on or off? So is there a conflict between patient privacy and the wishes of your representative? So especially patients who'd be suffering from dementia, or for whom cameras may bring a great deal of stress because they can't understand why they're there. Do they no longer have privacy rights independent of their family's wishes? Or are patients who have a representative still able to have some level of control?
Mr. Chairman, can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry, my hearing and how it's coming across. I apologize for my hearing.
Yeah, it's difficult with the remote sometimes to hear. Representative Mitchell, I'm going to ask you, as I did with Representative Wynn earlier, if you could try to state your question a little more succinctly, because it is a little difficult to hear here when it's by remote.
Is there a conflict between patient privacy and the representatives of that patient wishes with respect to the camera?
Okay, I'm going to let the lawyer, I think I know what the answer is, but I'm going to let the expert on that. Okay.
I'm going to step. Okay. I guess you can't see me. Good afternoon. Again, this is Leah Aldridge, as a member of the Georgia Bar and someone that worked for Madam Chair in negotiating this compromise bill. The definition of representative is found on line 29. And a representative is defined in Code Section 3192. It may also be an adult child who has obtained the written consent of a majority of his or her siblings. We also address the issue of whether a resident who is not of sound mind, when it is that someone else can consent to recordings on their behalf. And it requires a physician who is treating that resident to make that determination, or that determination might have already been made by operation of law by the resident, his or herself, through a power of attorney, through a durable health care power of attorney, or by a court of law through guardianship. So this bill really has significant protections for the patient, and in the unfortunate circumstances where that patient cannot, it does not have decision-making capacity, there is a process for that determination to be made within this bill. Madam Chair worked very, very hard to balance both the family's interest and peace of mind with patient and roommate, resident and roommate privacy rights. And I hope that addresses your question.
So, can I ask it? So, I think that if the patient hadn't given that right to a family member by one of the issues and types of permissions that you gave, if they would be the one to make the decisions, but if they had given the power of attorney or were deemed to be incapable of making that kind of decisions by themselves, then they would not be able to override what was allowed. Is that correct? Does that answer your question, Representative Mitchell?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
So.
All right. Very good. Now, we do have, I'm going to ask a question here myself, Madam Chair, and then we have some individuals that'd like to speak. I did want to ask, just for, and I can follow up later with you. I was concerned on if you look at line 126 and 127, it states, of course, that a facility may remove without notice and at the resident's expense any electronic monitoring device installed, which would be in violation of the article, so where it was not approved and acknowledged in advance. I just want to make sure that that does pass muster in terms of, we would be removing a piece of private property from that resident. I just want to make sure we contemplate that. Again, that's having just read it earlier. I want to make sure that that's not an issue. And I did want to mention that I will be interested in speaking to the nursing home association a little bit, the Georgia Healthcare Association, about lines 84 to 88, just to make sure that's not a concern, because when you have an individual who's in a room with someone who doesn't want a camera in their room, it does place somewhat of a burden on the facility to find them a room that's suitable. And so even though it does say, as soon as the circumstances permit, I would be interested in how the industry feels about that, because it may not be as easy to find as there may be a lot of folks that have privacy concerns about this. So I want to make sure that they contemplate that as well. So,
well, the answer to the first question is that they knowingly hamper a let's say some, one son or daughter, when the other person that had power of attorney had given permission and came in and tampered with it, obstructed, whatever, if they couldn't work that out with the family and it was infringing on the other person's rights, then the home would have the right to remove it. But it's only if in a situation where there's knowingly going and trying to cause problems with it.
Very good. Chair Lady Cooper, I think you've exhausted all of our questions from the committee. Thank you very much. And we are now going to hear from several interested parties. To begin with, Mr. Bauer, Mr. Tom Bauer with Leading Age Georgia. Is he here or is he remote? Okay, he is remote. Mr. Bauer?
I'm on remote, Mr. Chairman. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir. Proceed.
Thank you. I want to thank Chair Lady Cooper for all the hard work that she has obviously put into this bill. I'm gonna be fairly brief. It is quite a bill, and we just barely have seen it, so we really haven't digested it all yet. But I think I could really be very brief by saying Representative LaHood made some really good, accurate statements, I think, about what's at stake here, and we feel like this bill is a good effort at balancing the safety of the patient, the rights of the patient, privacy of the patient, and acknowledging some of the challenges to facilities. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing the bill as it goes through. I did have one question that my legislative chair had sent, and I'm not sure, on line 63 to 65, and this may be a question for Ms. Aldridge. It's about the consent being an authorization of the roommate. It mentions pursuant to subsection C of 3018-146, and I could not find that, so I didn't really know the context of that paragraph.
Okay, so the question, thank you, Mr. Bauer. The question is about, on line 65, it refers to subsection C of 31-8-146. Mrs. Aldridge, can you clarify what code section that is and speaks to?
Oh, I see it's in the bill now. I got you.
Okay.
I went to the code. Thank you. Never mind.
Admissibility. The lady states. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, and we look forward to following this and continuing balance.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. We now have Miss Jenny Helms, who's also with Leading Age Georgia. Ms. Helms?
Mr. Chairman, I think wasn't sure whether she was going to testify for us, so you got a twofer there. I think
Yes,
she's
sir.
not testifying.
Quite all right. We are told this one has stepped out. Okay. All right. Ms. Melanie McNeil, our state long-term care ombudsman, is remote, as I understand. Ms. McNeil?
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am the state long-term care ombudsman. We're advocates for residents of long-term care facilities, and it has been mentioned, this bill has been pending for a couple of years. We had noted on some of the prior versions that there were concerns, and I still have a couple of concerns about this bill, but I must say, especially during this time for almost a year now, that residents have been unable to see their loved ones very easily, it's really important that we make it possible for residents and families to be able to see each other and communicate. Just a couple of concerns that I think can be worked out, but in the bill, and I'm not sure if I have the most current version, but on page 3, at my line 53, there's reference made to a healthcare provider. On the last pages of on the consent form, the description of who can turn off the device is a healthcare professional. So neither of these terms is defined, and I think it needs to be defined. Part of the reason that residents and family members want to have cameras in the room is to be able to monitor the cares it's given. So if anybody is considered a healthcare professional and those people can turn the camera off, that may defeat the purpose. So I think there just needs to be a clarification. Are we talking about an RN or an LPN? Or are we talking about really anybody in the facility? What exactly do we mean? I think that just needs a little more, some definition. What I have on my line 52 through 58 are instances that the monitoring device could be turned off. I think it's important to say in here that it's turned off only when the resident requests that the camera is turned off before it's actually turned off. Because if anybody can just come in and turn it off, a healthcare professional, LPN comes in and just turns it off. That again sort of defeats the purpose. I think what we're trying to do here is allow the resident to control what happens, like what's being recorded. So a resident may not want to have a recording of them being bathed, but maybe they do. I mean, because who's really going to be looking at this? The resident and probably their representative or their family member. Part of the reason for this is just to assure, like Chairman Cooper was saying, if a resident is being cared for and they end up being bruised, but not because the caregiver did anything wrong. You'd want to be able to see that. And you can't see that if the resident wants that to be filmed, but the healthcare professional, however you want to describe him, just comes in and turns it off. So I think we should add something in there about the resident having some ability to control when it's turned off. One of the other concerns with the bill is there isn't anything that addresses what happens if it doesn't get turned back on. And I know it's a little sticky trying to figure that part out, but again, it's not helpful to say, to have legislation that says, here's what the best case scenario will be, without thinking about what happens when that goes wrong. So I think we just need to have, something in here that addresses, the responsibility for turning it back on.
Thank you, Ms. McNeil. Those are very constructive, helpful points. Any other points, Ms. McNeil?
Really just, I think this is a good effort, and I think it just needs a little bit more work. And with that, I think we can move forward with something that will really help families who right now just have no hope of seeing their loved ones in person anytime soon. So, yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
I hope we can work this out. Thank you.
I think Chairman Cooper wants to make a statement to you, Ms. McNeil. Stand by.
Right. And if you can call you Melanie, since I know you personally.
Absolutely.
Okay. And we've worked together on so many elder abuse bills that have passed this legislature with help from all of y'all. She has been a guiding person for us in taking care of the elderly. It does specify on the form that they fill out, Melanie, the patient specifies, and only the patient can decide when it's cut off. But we'll look at trying to make it, that's on the form, but if we need to mention it here or something too, we can also do that, but the other suggestions, we'll look at them. So thank you very much for those.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. We've done a lot of work together over a lot of years. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McNeil. Thank you very much. I have tremendous respect, as you know, for you and for our long-term care ombudsman who are dedicated to protecting absolutely the most vulnerable people in this state. Okay, we now have very important that we hear from Mr. Jason Brose with the Georgia Healthcare Association. Mr. Brose, let me turn you on back there. You are live.
Test, can you hear me? All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Jason Brose, representing the Georgia Healthcare Association. We represent about 95% of the state's nursing homes in the state. Just wanted to come here and thank Madam Chair, thank Leah for their hard work that they've done on this. It certainly was a compromise effort. She has been a wonderful patient advocate. This is something that has been needed for a while, and we recognize that. We certainly did not get everything we wanted out of this, but this has been a wonderful bill, and we really appreciate her time and to you. And I wanted to briefly mention, you had a question about lines 84.
Yes, he's speaking to a question that I had. Just wanted to make sure I drew attention to that particular subsection A there. Correct, sir.
All right, so I think the facility, this language here is for the facility to try to accommodate both residents in the room. The facility will do anything that they need to do to move a patient. They're not just going to boot one of the other residents in the room out if one of them doesn't consent. So.
Understood. I was just concerned about the hardship it might create to make that happen during any, depending on what kind of volume you have. But at any rate, again, I just wanted to draw attention to it for the industry.
Okay.
I understand.
All right.
Any other comments about this measure?
No, sir.
Mr. Brose? So y'all are supportive of
this
bill?
the measure in its current form, we are currently supportive of it and appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
The facility will try to accommodate the other resident in the two-person room to move him to
Representative, will you state your question to me so everyone we have people online that need to hear everything that happens here. So we're going to we have a question from Representative McLeod, and the question is for Mr. Brose, but ask it ask it on your mic. Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you, Chairman. I was just trying to get clarification on what would happen if a roommate refused to have a camera in that room. And you had pointed out, which was really a good, valid point, that, would somebody have to be moved? And I think I'll leave you to respond to my inquiry on that.
Sure, and Chairwoman Cooper and us worked on this language to make sure that we're not kicking anybody out of a room, but when it is feasible for the facility to move the patient to another room where they can have access to the camera, and whether it be another room where the roommate consents, we'll make every attempt to do so.
Okay, any other questions briefly? We have gone over 2 hours now. Any question for Mr. Brose before he leaves? I think we've heard what we really needed to hear from him, which is that they're supportive of this measure. Thanks to all of our members for sticking with us. We have taken up some very important bills this year, and they require study, as this one did. They require a lot of questions, and I just appreciate the great questions we get from our committee. So stand by. We will likely have a called meeting on Monday, and so be studying all of these measures that now are before us. Thank you so much, and this meeting is adjourned.